All right. Welcome, everyone, to Rare Conversations. My name is Zach Lowe. I am the Senior Director of Communications here at Rare. For those of you who have joined us for a past Rare Conversation, welcome back. Thanks so much for hanging out with us again. For those of you who are new to Rare or Rare Conversations, Rare is an international nonprofit organization and a global leader in social change for people and nature. Rare Conversations is our virtual conversation series with leaders doing extraordinary things at the intersection of environment, conservation, sustainability, and behavior change. You can view all past Rare Conversations at our website, rare.org/rare-conversations. Just this year, we spoke with Rylan Engelhart, who is the founder of Kiss the Ground, and Carlos Alvarado Quesada, former president of Costa Rica. So head on over after this event to rare.org, check those out and past conversations. And while you're there, why don't you sign up for our e-updates so you never miss a great opportunity like this one. Okay, today we are honored to welcome Heather White, an environmental lawyer, policy expert, and author to Rare Conversations. Heather worked on the 2000 presidential campaign of Vice President Al Gore and served as an environmental policy advisor to U.S. Senator Russ Feingold from Wisconsin. Heather is the former president of Yellowstone Forever, the nonprofit partner of Yellowstone National Park, and she served as the executive director of the Environmental Working Group. She is also the author of One Green Thing, which was included in Rare's 2022 Rare Books Summer Reading List. You can pick up a copy at her website, onegreenthing.org, or head over to Amazon, where they are having a flash sale, only $6.37 plus shipping, or any of your favorite retailers. Heather, welcome to Rare Conversations.
Thank you so much, Zach. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome, terrific. So let's get right into it because you and I go way back. So let's start there. We worked together on Capitol Hill many moons ago, and when we were both in the office of U.S. Senator Russ Feingold. So you've worked in policy for years. Your book, however, is all about individual action and what people themselves can do to help save the planet. So let's begin with how you see that relationship between what we need from large-scale policy change and what people can do in their everyday lives to help fight climate change.
Such a great question, Zach, and it's on the top of so many people's minds. Obviously, we need global market and policy action. There's no doubt about it. And if you and I and everybody on this call goes vegan, and if we never take an airplane again and only walk and never use an EV car, we're not going to solve the climate crisis. We know that. But unfortunately, as environmentalists, when we start the conversation with the technology, when we talk about the need to electrify everything, when we talk about 1.5 degrees Celsius, and when we get really technical and we talk about these global and market solutions, what most people hear is, I don't matter. And that's not true. They do matter. People think, well, I'm not, I don't work for the UN, even though, of course, there may be people on this call who do, I don't work for the UN. I'm not a legislator. How can I make this huge change? And it starts with all of us. And I actually have a pretty personal story as how I kind of got to this point where understanding the power of individual action is not about the math. It's not about the math. It's not about an individual's carbon footprint. We know that. We know that the idea of a carbon footprint was created by oil and gas PR execs to try to shift the burden of the climate crisis to us, even though they've known for more than 100 years that their product causes this. But it's actually, the important thing is that individual action drives culture change. It's so simple, the idea that individual action drives culture change, but it's critical because without that culture change, these policy and market solutions are going to fall flat.
So that's even in the promotion for this event, somebody in one of the comments talked about how individual action is a fairy tale. So how do you react when we hear this kind of debate about the role of individual action versus policy change and people, allies, climate allies, dismissing it? How do you start that conversation with people about why individual action does matter?
That's such a great question. And it was fun to see that comment too, right? Because obviously I'm not marketing a fairy tale, right, of individual action. But how do we think we're going to get the collective action? There's not a magic wand. It's not like, these governments are just going to do it without individuals taking action. So we have to personalize this climate journey. we also need to bring as many people into this movement as possible. And what happened to me, Zach, is that, as you read my resume, I've been doing this work for more than 20 years, but it was really a conversation at the dinner table with my kids that brought me to this point and inspired me to write this book. And in 2019, my older daughter, who was a freshman in high school, asked if she could attend the walkout and the climate strike inspired by Greta Thunberg here in Bozeman, Montana, which is where I live. And of course, Zach, I'm going to say yes, right? I'm an environmentalist, but I wasn't really even thinking. I looked at the weather report, all of my mom energy kicked in, and there were thunderstorms, and she had a super heavy backpack and a trumpet. And I literally, just without even thinking, offered to pick her up and drive her to the protest site. Like, I'm so embarrassed, right? But I did. I wasn't thinking. And she was like, wait, what? You're going to pick me up and drive me to a climate protest in our gas fueled car, and you're worried about my trumpet and my backpack? What about my future? And then she said, I'm so sick and tired of all these praise, like all this praise for Gen Z young activists, Greta this, or, Maya Pen this, or you name the activists. Where are the baby boomers, Mom? Where are Gen X? Where are the millennials? You can't leave this crisis all on our shoulders. And then she started crying at our dinner table. And my younger daughter was like, yeah, Mom, what have you been doing? And this is my life's work. So this story relates to this question of individual action versus policy. In my day job, I was so focused on policy my entire career, but I was not having intentional personal conversations with the people I loved about not only what I was doing, but what they could do for us to create a healthier, greener future for the next generation. So we only get the policy change, the market change, and it only works if we have the culture change. And that's why it's not an either or, it's both and. We have to have individual action, and we have to have this collective action, because one connects to the other. And I think the other thing that's so important, Zach, is just, again, it's not about the math, is what I keep telling people. It's about your intention. It's not about progress, it's about perfection and culture change. But if we all do it, as you have reported, Brer, working with, the Project Drawdown, individual and household actions can contribute up to 25% of the carbon reductions we need if we all do it. So the math adds if we all do it.
I love that you just shared a personal story, because that is one of those ways that really inspires people to take action. It allows people to see themselves in this issue. I bet there are plenty of people joining us today that have had similar conversations. And so that's kind of my next question about, even if you adopt some of these behaviors we were talking about, even if you put solar panels on your roof, adopt a plant-rich diet, drive an EV, how does it then turn into that collective action? And I think storytelling is one way. What are some of those other ways that it moves from the personal to the collective?
Storytelling is a really important part of it, but also just sharing your experience. I mean, research shows that in a neighborhood, if someone puts solar panels on, everyone else on that street is 50% more likely to ask about it, consider having solars. I mean, there actually is peer-reviewed literature on how important that action is. I think also just sharing our experiences. And again, I was not doing that in the way that I thought. I thought that my kids would just see me and that was enough, but I needed to have these conversations with them and with my family. So I think it's important. And, Katherine Hayhoe always talks about the most important thing you can do about climate action is to talk about it. I think one of the things we're really good at and we've been successful at in the environmental community is letting people see the dystopian future we're going to have if we don't take action. But we need to have more conversations about what we can create. What could a healthier, greener, more just future look like? And I'll tell you another story, Zach. I just recently gave a talk in California to a bunch of fifth graders. And we were talking about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Let's end poverty by 2030, gender equity by 2030, clean water for all for 2030, clean energy access for all by 2030. And these 10-year-olds knew that that wasn't going to happen. We have 7 years. And they were like, that's not going to happen. And so we started talking about aspirational goals. I started asking them, well, what does it look like if we meet these goals? And this little girl raised her hand, 10 years old, and said, is there a virtual reality that I could step into where I could see what life would feel like and what it would look like and what it would be like if we met these goals? And that was such a powerful moment for me because, and if anybody on this call is a technologist, please do that. We need that, but we need to start showing the picture of what we're building toward, not what we're fighting against, because we are now seeing the destruction. More and more people are connecting the dots between what they're experiencing and climate action, but we also need to change that narrative to, it can be beautiful. A clean energy economy can be beautiful, and justice and equity can be at the center of that. But we need to enlist our artist friends, our designer friends, our technologists to really let people see that. So I think the storytelling is important, and sharing with people how you feel. And one of the things we have at One Green Thing, Zach, is a joy tracker. This idea of a daily practice of sustainability can actually bring more joy into your life. And so if the person who has the solar panels is super excited, that excitement, that enthusiasm really influences others. And that's how you see that collective action and change.
The power of what is possible, that part of the story where it's not necessarily what happens if you don't act, but what happens if you do, is so important and kind of left out of the climate conversation sometimes because it's very real what these consequences are. We're already seeing it around the world. So kind of flipping it or doing yes and what is possible is such an important part, especially in the conversations we have one-on-one with people. Let me switch tracks a little bit to eco-anxiety, which you talk a lot about in the book. And before we dive in, though, why don't you, for the audience, define eco-anxiety and what's the difference between eco-anxiety and just being worried about climate change?
Well, eco-anxiety is defined by the American Psychological Association as the chronic fear of environmental doom. And actually, in September 2021, the Oxford English Dictionary defined the term as unease or apprehension about harm to the environment caused by human activity and climate change. Some other terms you might hear are climate anxiety, solastalgia, eco-grief, climate distress, but more and more people are seeing the impacts of climate and really worrying about the future that we're creating and that they're inheriting. And the young people that especially are worried about the future they're inheriting from us. And so the difference between, like, if you don't have eco-anxiety on some level, you're probably not paying attention, or you're probably not reading the newspaper. But if eco-anxiety is interfering with your daily life, that's when you need to go see a medical professional. And there are some amazing groups out there, the Climate Psychology Alliance, the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, and there's more trainings that are being offered to mental health professionals for kids. Mostly it's kids who are experiencing that, but not always. The UK recently did a survey where nearly half of the child psychiatrists there had clients that had, clinical eco-anxiety. But most of what my book I'm talking about is the overall concern, especially that young people have for what the future is going to be like when they're grown-ups.
A lot of people joining us today may be experiencing eco-anxiety as you just described. Many people might have children experiencing it. They probably had conversations similar to the one that you described with your daughter, and that story that's so powerful and really makes it kind of relatable. So let's talk about dealing with it. What are some of the keys to helping yourself or helping others counter eco-anxiety?
Such an important question. Before I dive into that, I just want to kind of go into what my research on eco-anxiety, because I think that can help with the context of some of the strategies to deal with it. What through my research, and that's really the experience that my daughter was sharing with me at that dinner table, that was eco-anxiety that she was experiencing. So I knew that I needed to dive into the mental health impacts of the climate crisis. And I also needed to create a way for more people to start seeing themselves in climate action. But with respect to eco-anxiety, there are three factors that contribute to it. I call it the eco-anxiety trifecta. The first is generalized anxiety. Gen Z, and these are kids born from 1997 to about 2010, they are experiencing such high levels of background anxiety that the Surgeon General actually issued a warning saying it's one of the biggest mental health crises that we've seen in decades. And that was even, obviously COVID made it a lot worse, but we have that background anxiety. The second issue that we're dealing with is chronic loneliness. So there was a recent survey that looked at Gen Zers. 8 out of 10 Gen Zers experience chronic loneliness compared to 5 out of 10 baby boomers. So we have the fact that young people are actually lonelier than the elderly right now. And then the third is a hyper awareness of the climate crisis through social media. And Zach, I'm Gen X I was born in the 70s, I grew up on John Hughes films and I was a latchkey kid, right? So one of the things that I think of when I think about social media is I'm worried about cyberbullying, about brands, about privacy. But people like Gen X and baby boomers tend to underestimate how much that these young people are sharing in real time climate disasters from kids that they're on their own age. So they're seeing the news from TikTok, they're seeing the news from these platforms that we maybe saw the news for 1 hour every night or read the paper. So it's a very different environment. So those are the 3 factors that are contributing to eco-anxiety. The other thing that I think is super, super important is that in poll after poll, we have to understand that Black, Indigenous, and people of color care more and worry more about the climate crisis. The people who have contributed the least amount of carbon pollution are suffering the most. And that's true racially, that's true economically, and that is also true intergenerationally. And there was a recent survey, it was a global survey, 10,000 young people ages 16 through 25, 47%, nearly half, said that they did not, that climate anxiety interfered with their daily lives. And 1 in 4 did not want to have children of their own. So that's just the extent of the problem. But your question was about, okay, wow, Heather, 1 in 4 do not want to have kids of their own, ages 16 through 25, global survey, 10,000 people. And it was specifically about climate. It wasn't, they weren't going to have kids of their own because of a lifestyle choice. But what you asked is, okay, so this is a huge problem. We know people are suffering. What can we do? The first thing you need to do, and this is a game-changing thing, ask the young people in your life, how they feel about climate change, and then listen. And I've had friends, Zach, say to me, well, Heather, of course your kids have eco-anxiety, they're your kids, this is what all they know. But to a person, when I've asked people to have this conversation, it has been game-changing for them. The other opportunity to spend as much time in nature as you can, you want to journal. We have some great resources. We have a bullet journal at One Green Thing. And then you want to figure out how you can contribute to climate action, realize you're not responsible for the crisis, but we're all part of the solution, and then find community.
I'm stuck on this dinner table conversation because I've wanted to, I've young children too. How do you, it's almost like preventive. I mean, I'm not sure, or maybe I should, but maybe that's a good first question. How do I identify it if there's eco-anxiety? Is it having the conversation and hearing what they have to say? Is that the first step to identify?
Yeah, and I read, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And they're young, mostly I'm talking about teenagers, but you'll be surprised, these 5th graders, they know.
Well, and you said that because I have a 5th grader and they're astute. They know what they're talking about. They're way more aware. How do you have that conversation without, maybe what's a conversation starter? It feels like a little heavy-handed to sit down,
right,
start passing around the plant-based dinner that you're going to have and say, what do you all think about climate change? What are some good tips or tactics of starting that conversation with younger kids or even up through teenagers?
Such a great question, Zach, and I get it a lot. And I tried to address this in my book. I have a discussion guide and where you just first ask the question, and it's important that kids be heard. And then you can create as a family or as a community or on your own an eco action plan where you're going to take action. But one of the things I think is important, Zach, is generally as environmentalists, we immediately start with the tips, plant-based, consider potentially a carbon offset, assuming you've done your research and it's for real, when you travel, think about riding your bike, instead of asking, who are you? Who are you in service? How do you show up for the people that you love? And how do you want to contribute to this movement? And so if you start there and ask, who are you in service? That's why I created this service superpower assessment. It's kind of like Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or Strength Finders. that creates an opportunity. And I've had fifth graders take it, young people can take it, little kids can take it, and they can start to see themselves and see their strengths in the way that they want to contribute. And then you sit down and you start talking about what you're interested in. And I go through this in the book. Like, my older daughter is a Beacon, which we'll talk about in just a minute, but she's all about social justice. She was really focused on the Green New Deal, and that's what she was going to do for her Eco Action Plan. My younger daughter, we'll talk about this too, is a Spark. So she's like the +1. And she was really excited about supporting the Malala Fund and education for girls internationally. That's what she wanted to do. And I focused on elections, as you know, Zach, I'm all about democracy is not a spectator sport. And then my husband was really focused on wildlife conservation. So there's ways that you can, as a family, say, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to move forward. But the most important thing is to listen. And also, Zach, share after you've really listened, share the changes you've seen in your lifetime, because a lot of these kids don't know it.
Yeah.
Like, my mother-in-law shared that, she was supposed to be fired. That was the school policy in 1973 when my husband was born. And it wasn't until 1978 that the Pregnancy, Discrimination Act was passed, where you couldn't fire someone for being pregnant. I mean, yes, we have huge changes we have to make, but we've also done big, big things. And having those personal conversations about changes you've seen is important to let kids know we can do it.
Yeah, showing people, particularly young people, what is possible is such I think any campaign strategist would tell you, you got to have milestones. You've got to reference those milestones because they inspire you to get to the next milestone. Such an important tip. You also talk a little bit about community and kind of building that community, because that's kind of like the way outward. You've taken the personal action, you've adopted these, maybe you've had the dinner conversation. How important is then building community? How do you build that community, and how do you see community as a climate solution?
Community is so important because that's the big driver of collective action, right? The more you share, the more you talk about the actions that you're taking personally, the more you talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, or, what COP28 is, and share with your family and friends, the more it becomes a cultural norm to care and to participate and to ask hard questions of your members of Congress or your legislators, wherever you may be. And so that's why community is so important. There's also some great opportunities. For example, if you're involved in a faith-based organization, Interfaith Power and Light does a lot at that community level to start thinking about even the buildings where there's houses of worship, schools, climate change curriculum. There's all kinds of opportunities for you to really take the lead, but you need that community and support, especially when you're dealing with climate emotions too. Like, that's where you can lean on to other people and know that you're not alone in climate action. It's really important.
And when we're talking about in those big groups, I like the idea of, like, at church or synagogue or mosque, when we're talking about it as a community, people start identifying it as a norm. If people are talking about it, they sense that it is the norm to adopt these behaviors, whatever they might be, they're more likely to do it themselves.
Exactly.
Let's we've talked about the superpowers. You talked about a couple examples that your daughters are. Let me quickly stop the poll. Everyone took the poll as they came in. Let's take a look and see what service superpower assessments we have in the crowd today. We have, looks like the influencer and the adventurer are both up there. Adventurer at 14%, influencer at 13%, but a pretty even split.
Yeah.
I took the assessment. I was an influencer. So what does that tell you about me, Heather?
Sure. So just stepping back, again, I use the analogy of Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or Strength Finders. This 5-minute assessment asks, how do you show up for the people you love? Who are you in service? So I'll just go down the list. So the adventurer is the person who embraces the physicality of the outdoors. They are calculated risk takers, and they're often really good at helping other people get outside their comfort zone. So they're important visionaries really in the climate movement. Then there's the beacon that is focused on social justice. They also are all about speaking truth to power. They're the folks that are really comfortable behind the bullhorn, and they're obviously really important when we have a movement. The third is the influencer, which is you, Zach, not a shocker. The influencer is all about people. The influencer focuses on what are the latest trends, really focused on culture, also focused on making sure that people can connect to each other. And it's really important because we need that community building. We need everybody to make sure they know what's the latest news and see that opportunity. So that's the role that influencers play. Then there's the philanthropist, which is a really big word. I know a lot of people like envision the Monopoly guy with a monocle, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's the giver. It's the person who shows up by donating their time, donating their resources, donating their networks. I mean, it's like if you're sick, it's the person who's going to bring you soup, right? That's the giver. And obviously we need philanthropy in order to really reach the huge solutions and scale the solutions that we have. And then there's the sage that's focused on the spiritual connection to nature. And this is an important role because the sage is able to kind of bridge that polarization that so many of us are experiencing. You know, we see this polarization in politics, but by focusing on the ethics and moral case for climate action, the sage has a really unique role. Then there's the spark, which is all about the +1. And a lot of people, when they find out they're a spark, they're like, oh my gosh, does that mean I'm not a leader? Of course you're a leader. But the spark is the person who says, sure, I'm in. I'll go to that nature documentary with you. I'll go to that rally with you. Sure, I'm going to try this cool brand that Zach, like a sustainable sneaker that Zach likes. I'm going to try it. Without the spark, there is no movement. So that's a really important role. And then finally, there's a wonk, which frankly, most of us are as environmentalists. The wonk is all about taking data and technology and trying to translate it in ways that people can understand.
And what did you say you were?
I'm a philanthropist wonk. It depends on what day I take it.
Yeah, right.
But that's really,
because I've taken this twice, and I think I got different ones. Did that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me at all. No, I'm definitely a giver. I love philanthropy, but I'm also, really, really nerdy. And I think that's a challenge we have in the environmental community is that when we talk about climate change, we zero in on our wonk selves and are like, can I talk to you about mushroom leather? Or I can't wait to tell you about this amazing technology, with plastic pollution, rather than stepping back and saying, have you talked to your kids about climate or grandkids or young people you love? How do you want to get involved? How do you might want to show up? Like we need all these different profiles starting that conversation and asking people what their strengths are and showing them a way in. So based on your service superpower, I then match you to a daily practice of sustainability. That's what the one green thing is. And think of it like yoga or running or meditation or prayer. The idea is that you do one thing each day intentionally. That's your daily practice of sustainability. And you do it to ease your eco-anxiety, help shift the culture, make yourself feel better. There is part of that. And also it's important for you to do this as a way for us to reach those big climate solutions, over time.
I love these profiles because it's kind of like if we identified one of the enemies as not feeling like what you do or how that matters. You don't matter to it is such an impediment. If I don't matter to it, why even bother? So this is such an easy way in to find out how you could get in the game, how you could start
exactly
to make a difference. So I love these profiles.
Exactly.
How did you?
And Zach, if I could just also say, also in the book, I have a 21-day plan based on your service superpower. It's like a fitness plan or a wellness plan where you can get started. And on the website, there's a 7-day plan to just getting started. So if you're a beacon, you're all about the rallies. But if you're a philanthropist, you may not be comfortable going to a climate rally. Or if you're, an adventurer, you may not want to lobby. But if you're a wonk, you love to lobby. There's all these different ways that you can show up.
Yeah. And anyone who's ever tried to diet or tried to start exercise, like you need a plan. Like you can't,
right.
Trying to just do it, it can be disempowering because you just get frustrated fast and stop. Exactly. Having this plan is like any of those other examples is the way to actually make that behavior stick.
Exactly.
So how did you come up? How long did it take you to come up with these profiles?
It took me about 6 months to come up with the profiles, and what it really was based on my personal experience and more than 2 decades in the environmental movement, thinking about the leaders that I worked with and the people that we need in the movement and how people could start seeing themselves having a unique role. I think a lot of people are afraid of getting started in climate action because they're afraid of doing sustainability wrong, right? They're afraid of being judged. And there is a lot of judgment in the community. And there's also a lot of greenwashing, right? So I'm not saying it's unfair, but in order to bring as many people in and have this cultural change that we need, we have to create an opportunity for people to understand it's about progress, not perfection. And so that's my thought process is pulling this together.
Perfect. All right. We definitely want to get to Q&A, and we've had some good questions come in, but I want to talk a little bit more about the book. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank you for the mention you give Rare and our CEO, Brett Jenks, in the book. So thank you very much for that.
Sure.
You talk in the book a lot about community and the necessity of community to manifest and amplify change. And speaking for an organization that focuses on the power of community, that really, resonated with me. So what could readers of the book expect, to get from those steps of building community, or where did you go to join that community?
Well, obviously, Rare is a great community. All the people that are joining us today, there's all kinds of wonderful resources I have in the book. I actually take the service superpowers and then identify different nonprofits that may match you if you're, if you're a wonk, or if you're a sage, or if you're, an influencer, for example, and also different subject areas too. So the second part of the book is making change through thinking about compassion. No, you can't go it alone. And then I talk about water, I talk about food, energy, you name it. So there's all kinds of jumping off points there. But I think the big picture that you're talking about, and so much of Rare's work with climate culture, the partnership with WildAid, of telling people, oh, no, wait, sorry, I only take a 5-minute shower, but not in a judgy way of like, hey, this is what I'm doing, or hey, we're having a potluck, it's plant-based, or hey, we're all sharing our favorite sustainable brands, not in a judgment exclusive way, but in a way that's inclusive and invites more people into the conversation. And I think Rare does such a good job of talking about that role of individual behavior change. Again, not about the math as an individual, but collectively, the research shows it does matter, but it's really about shifting those norms within your own communities. And so there's all kinds of great opportunities.
Right. And you talk about that in the book. It's not, and I think you started the conversation off this way also, when you do these acts, it objectively reduces emissions, which is good. Every little bit helps.
Yeah.
But as you acknowledge, and as we all, acknowledge, our individual actions aren't going to solve the problem. And it's that other piece that kind of can get overlooked. It's that social aspect of when I do it, I am a trusted person in my community. People see me doing action, they're more likely to adopt, and it ripples out. Do you think that the climate movement organizations have identified that enough yet? Have identified that kind of social component, that social proof, social pressure as a very important lever in getting to where we need to get to? Is that taken off yet?
No, I think Rare is the real leader in this. It hasn't taken off yet. I think because we've been so focused on fighting the oil and gas companies, right? And in this tension, understandably, that we've forgotten. It's almost, I feel like the analogy is like people who are focused on elite athletes and talking about the Olympics, forget about talking about mobility for all of us. We need to invite as many people in as we can. And that's how the culture change. Individual action creates culture change. It's so simple. We're all cultural change agents in our community. People are looking to us. They want to hear what we have to say. That we know this through social media, right? Well, we've seen it, in our own communities, but we forget to have those intentional conversations, because to us, especially veterans who are really tired, and I hope this book can really help restore your spirit if you are a veteran activist, because so many people are feeling burnout right now. Like, oh my gosh, what more has to happen before we see this change? But one of the first principles in the book, the first part of the book is who are you? The second part of the book is how you apply your daily practice of sustainability. The first chapter and the second part of the book is no, you can't go it alone. Community compassion, self-compassion, and we need more environmental nonprofits talking about not only community building, but really about why you as an individual do matter in this movement to get to that collective change. And again, it's not a judgy, because we have to live with the contradiction, Zach, right? Of like, oh my gosh, I had a steak last week. I live in Montana. Like, I'm a horrible person. No, you're not. The system has to change. We're not responsible for these emissions, right? Like what is it? Like 90% of the emissions are from 10 companies or something like that. I don't have that memorized, but it's the oil and gas companies. It's not us. But we're all part of the solution in a way that isn't judgment ridden, in a way that's inclusive and shifts that positive vision for the future.
Perfect. All right. Audience members, keep questions coming in. Use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom box. Before we get to that though, lightning round, Heather. All right. Keep these responses brief if you can. If maybe they could be shorter than the questions I ask. All right, first one. In the book, you list some heroes associated with each of the super power profiles. Who are your personal heroes?
Obviously, Erin Brockovich, she wrote the foreword to the book, dear friend, just an amazing, amazing person. Also a huge fan of Maya Penn, who is a Gen Z activist who I saw her first TED Talk at 13. She's incredible. And then Shane Doyle, who is one of the parents of the Held v. Montana case, the landmark case that was decided just last month at the trial court level for young people suing for a violation of their constitutional rights for lack of climate action. And I said it really fast.
That was cool.
Lightning
Talk
round.
about
Lightning
an
round fast.
inspiring moment. The case in Montana, it was incredible.
Huge. I had nothing to do with it, but it's huge.
You're from Tennessee, home of the Great Smoky Mountains. You live in Montana, doorstep of Yellowstone, and home to Glacier National Park. What is your favorite national park?
It's Yellowstone, hands down. It's amazing.
That was
Everything you ever wanted.
That was an easy one. All right. And finally, besides your book, what is a book that you think everyone should read? Could be on this issue, could be whatever. What is a book that you think everyone should read?
Okay, this is not going to be your typical, because obviously we've got Breeding Sweetgrass, Intersectional Environmentalists, Saving Us, Michael Mann's book. We've got All We Can Save. Here's the book that I think everybody on this call should read: The Good Ancestor. The Good Ancestor by Roman Cesark. I may be mispronouncing his last name. The Good Ancestor. We all need to start thinking of ourselves as ancestors, Zach. It is important frame of reference that can sustain us when we do this work, to avoid burnout and to really keep us focused on that positive vision for the future. One of the things I say is, like, what will future generations thank us for? What will they wish we had known? And we can make a huge difference.
That's awesome, because the other books you mentioned have been on Rare Books. Go to rare.org, go to type in Rare Books, and you'll find our past book list, but this has not. So I'm going to put that on our next Rare Books list. So
fantastic.
Thank you for that recommendation. All right, Stephanie, my partner in crime, is right over here. She's going to help me open up the questions. So first question, it's a two. Oh, okay. We're going to combine it into one though. All right. Thank you very much. Do you have any advice about talking to climate skeptics or friends who don't believe that individual action matters? Or how do you recommend helping folks get comfortable talking about these topics in everyday life?
Oh, such a good question. So I will say I don't spend a lot of time with climate skeptics. The reason I don't spend a lot of time with climate skeptics is because they're in the vast minority, at least in the United States. And actually, there was a recent poll that came out that showed that people who believe in climate change tend to underestimate how many people agree with them, 2 to 1. So it's really 2/3 of Americans that agree with that. So I try not to spend too much time with climate skeptics. But if I do have a conversation with a climate skeptic, I start off by asking about what world do they want their next generation, the young people they love, to inherit. For example, I'm from Tennessee originally. Obviously, coal and strip mining was an important part of that economy. Someone is talking about how important coal jobs are. And I ask, would you like to have your grandkid work in a coal mine? And the answer for most people is no, there's nothing wrong. That was an important part of our economy when it was happening. But those are very difficult, hard jobs, and it's not necessarily something that you want in the future. And so that's a different entry point. With respect to people who feel like they don't matter, you've got to listen. You have to let them know that they're not alone. I gave a talk at Montana State recently, and this young woman was crying. She was talking about how she didn't want to have children because of the climate crisis. She had friends who were not going to go to college because they thought we weren't going to meet these 2030 important landmarks and milestones. And we have to let them know that we, older generations, are not giving up on them. And then I think the other thing is just the good climate news. I think more and more in the environmental community, and I know Rare is doing this, is sharing the wins, sharing the progress. The Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, is the biggest thing that we've done ever in the history of legislation for climate. And we need to start singing its praises and showing people how important it is.
All right. Rob asks about climate-related disasters. Today, weather is the news, and that's kind of a global thing. So how do it's kind of that case of how can I possibly impact the weather? So how would you make that connection and a conversation about mudslide, wildfires, like so many people in the US have experienced the effects of this year, hurricanes? How do you bridge that conversation to personal climate action?
Oh, such an important question. I do always make sure I make the connection so people understand, the wavy jet streams. They understand the science about how these are all related, the increasing weather disasters that we're experiencing. And then I talk about the importance of being prepared. So, I'm in Montana, I have a Go Kit. I talk about American Red Cross and International Red Cross have been talking about this, for 30 years. But then I talk about the reason that individual action is important is because you have to have a sense of agency. If you don't control what you can control, if you don't start working toward a vision of a positive future, then all you're left was with hopelessness. And there's actually a great quote from Maggie Smith, the poet, that says, I know an optimist will outwork a cynic, and outperform a cynic anytime, because the optimist will try. We have to try. We don't have any other choice. And it all starts with individual action. And of course, we have to hold our electeds around the world accountable for their decisions.
Question from Andrew. Are the most impactful actions people can take the same around the world, or do they vary country by country?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think they vary country by country. I think the most important thing is for us to, do what we can to hold our elected officials accountable. I'm sure like water may be a critical issue in some areas. I mean, it's a critical issue everywhere, but endangered species may be more important in other areas. I think that regenerative agriculture and soil. So I don't think it's a one size fits all solution. That's why I tried to create this individualized approach to climate action in a way that connects with you, your personal values, your culture, where you are, and what issues that you are interested in.
Question from Thomas about moral licensing, which is when people allow themselves to do something bad because they earlier did something good. You talked a little bit about this with the, you have a steak, but I put solar panels on my house, so yeah, I'm going to go have a steak. How do you address moral licensing? How can we talk about that?
I think we have to let it go. I'm sorry. I mean, greenwashing is greenwashing. I get that, and that we need to focus on the corporations that are creating all these emissions. I think that we need to encourage people to do the best they can. We need to give them, unfortunately for consumers, the science is always changing. The brand that you think is awesome is not awesome. The behavior that you think is important turns out, only 9% of plastics are actually recycled, but you've been recycling for 30 years. But the fact that you tried does count. And but it's not about the math. It's that you are trying your best. We can't do it all. We have to have these big culture change. That's why it's kind of like a choose your own adventure for climate, and the moral licensing and the moral, I guess what I would say, gatekeeping, isn't helping us. In my view, it's not helping us. It's not bringing more people in. It's leaving people out. We have to tell them the truth. You can't say, the SUV was a great buy, you have to tell them the truth, but also you can't say you don't have a seat at this table, or I'm not going to engage with you because, you're wearing, you're not wearing mushroom leather. We have to have a way for us to have these honest conversations about the need for the systemic transformation that has to happen.
Right. A question from an anonymous attendee. Is it helpful to talk about the benefits of these actions other than climate benefits? So health benefits, saving money, what is the calculus there in how you
love this question? 100% love this question. One of the things I try to say is this daily practice of sustainability can bring more joy into your life. We need to start talking about climate action as a joyful way. Again, not Pollyanna, not, telling people something that's not true, but climate action can be fun and rewarding. Working in a community garden, learning about soil health, doing a clothing swap in your backyard that's all sustainable fashion, so you don't buy any fast fashion, for the next 3 years. Also talking about saving money, talking about the health benefits of a plant-based diet. These are all really important ways for people to start seeing the behaviors that they may adopt anyway as climate oriented. And so they can start seeing themselves in the movement. We can start having those important conversations, and then we can get them to vote and get them to take those important actions that create the policy and market wins that we need.
Let me ask you about, since you've written the book and you've been talking about the book for over a year now, right?
Yeah.
What have you learned? What has been the response? I'm sure there's been on various points a lot of response, but what has really stuck with you in this year about people's response to the book after reading the book? What has stuck with you?
I think what stuck with me for people who are new to this movement, the idea that they can be part of it. There is a barrier. The barrier is the wonk approach, the starting the conversation with the technology. And frankly, you know, my husband teases me. He's like, how do you get invited to cocktail parties if you're like, hi, I'm Heather, we're all going to die? You know, it's true. But like, so much of the climate reporting is about the disasters that we're all experiencing, what happens and what our future is going to be like. That's all true. I just want to be clear, that's all true. But that's when people shut down. So what's been exciting to me is for people seeing that they can have a role, even if they don't have a PhD, that they can be part of this movement. The other thing that I think is so powerful is when I gave a talk recently, there were some college kids that came up to me afterwards and said, we feel seen. Like, to just for me to be able to tell young people that this isn't all on your shoulders. You know, you're not going to save us. Your job is not to save us, Gen Z. That's not your job. We admire all of the work that you're doing, but you are not alone. And we are going to have this intergenerational partnership, big word for what I call think beyond your age. We are intergenerationally all going to lock hands and create a beautiful future together. So that's been exciting to me too.
Great. All right, next question from the audience. The general population has so many other personal priorities over and above climate action. And climate action can often feel like work, as in only the super motivated will prioritize a 21-day climate plan over a 21-day exercise plan. How do we nudge individuals to change their behaviors without making it feel like work?
Oh, I love this question. It's hard, but here's what's important is, especially with young people, Generation Z, there was a recent poll, US Conference of Mayors, 80% said number one issue is climate. It's intersectional with racial justice, with healthcare, with the economy, is climate change. 4-H, which is an American agricultural student-based organization, they did a survey of their kids. 87% said climate change was the number one issue and adults weren't doing enough to address it. So generationally, climate is not necessarily seen as work. It is for older folks. So I think that part of the answer lies in the question we just had of making sure people understand that you can save money and go green, you can be healthier and go green. And I think that's really the importance of, I love this, is like more work I have to do. I think grounding this conversation in being a good ancestor. What is the next generation going to thank you for? You know, in the book, I have this exercise where you reflect on someone in your life that's made a really important change for you, whether it's a mentor or a grandparent or a family member who's helped the life you're leading possible. And then you think about the qualities they had, and then you envision that it's 2050 and you're having lunch with a young person you're related to, and they're having a conversation with you. What are they going to thank you for? What are they going to ask? You know, what are they going to wish you had known? So I think that important long-term thinking is an important way for us to make it seem less like work and more about joy, more about health, saving money, and creating a future for the people that we love, that we haven't met yet, our future loved ones.
I love those questions that you've offered. The forward-looking, like, you know, what's the world you want to see? Even the, like, do you want your grandchild to be working in the coal mine? To really kind of visualize it for people, to make it real and not kind of dwell on the past, not dwell on, you know, confrontation, but more like really put them in the chair and have them think about what they have control over.
Exactly.
As you've traveled around and over the past year, what has surprised you kind of politically? And by that, I mean, you've spent time on a presidential campaign, you worked in the Senate. So you know, it can be easy to say that, like, blue states want to do more climate action, red states don't. But from your conversations and from using different messages, has anything surprised you in speaking to people that might not traditionally be thought of as environmentalists?
Yes, and that's such a powerful question for us all to kind of ask ourselves as we travel around. And obviously, I'm focused on the United States right now in my work. I think what has surprised me the most is when you make it deeply personal, you can have conversations that you never would otherwise. If you talk about the Inflation Reduction Act or, you know, a cap and trade program or a carbon tax, you lose people. But if you ask, okay, I want you to think about someone who made a difference in your life. And I'll just tell you, if I do have enough, I think I have enough time. I don't have my clock up. Sorry, Zach, but I'll
We
just
got
tell
time.
another quick story.
We got a
I
few
have
more
another
minutes.
quick story. Okay, I have another quick story. So in my TED talk that I do in TEDx Boston, I talk about how it's our turn to pay it forward. And I ask, is there someone in your life that's made the life you're living now, today, right now, in this moment possible? And for all of us, there is. And for me, it's as simple as an apple pie. And when I was little, when I was growing up, I would always visit my grandfather, and I have a cute little picture of my grandfather and me. And he would always make me an apple pie from scratch. And he would pick it from his orchard. He would cut up the apples. He'd roll out the dough. I didn't really think anything about it when I was growing up. I just knew it was an awesome dessert. And then 25 years later, I was apple picking with my daughters, and I was checking out at the apple orchard from the old timey store, and I could smell apple pies baking. And all of a sudden, I was just transported back into my grandfather's kitchen. And tears started streaming down my face. I had to like sit down and just take a moment because, Zach, my grandfather had Parkinson's disease. It took him an hour to get dressed in the mornings. And making that pie for me must have taken so much concentration and so much labor that I never really thought about it. And so this simple dessert was so much more than, a dessert. It was a profound gesture of love. And I just ask, is there a moment that you've had in your life where you've realized how much someone loved you? That sense of what I call breathtaking gratitude. And I just say, we've got to take that feeling of that gratitude of someone in our life, whether it's a mentor or a family member or a teacher who has created that moment for us of gratitude and love, and we need to pay it forward. And so ultimately, all this work, especially for people on this webinar right now that are burned out and exhausted and feeling all the anxiety, just knowing that your work is ultimately rooted in love of the I call them future loved ones, the people you haven't met yet that you will grow to love, in your community, in your family. And that's what we really need to do to move it forward. So when I've had those conversations about being a good ancestor, when I've had the conversations about what do you want your grandkid, your neighbor, the young person you love to be doing in the future, what does the future look like? I've been able to have really important and powerful conversations that blow past Republican and Democrat or conservative and liberal or whatever the context is where you may live. And I think the other thing is that Brene Brown has this wonderful quote that says, move in close, because people are really hard to hate close up. And I think that's where, when I say I don't have conversations with climate skeptics, I do, but I don't make it about, is climate change real? Because it doesn't matter if they believe it's real or not, because it's real. It's more about what is the future that we're leaving the next generation. And that's where that's been the most surprising and exciting thing for me in this journey.
What should people not do in these conversations? What are mistakes, so that kind of getting into it with a climate skeptic probably isn't going to get you anywhere? We talked a little bit about, the math might turn people off. What are some other things that don't work well that maybe we should steer away from in our conversations about climate change?
I think judgment. I think just being curious is really important. I'm sure this is true to a lot of people on this call. I have friends who feel like they need to confess their environmental sins to me. They're like, oh my gosh, Heather, have you over for dinner, but I have plastic. I'm so sorry, there's plastic in my house. I'm like, it's 2023 in our society. There's probably going to be plastic in your house, or, oh, I don't have a hybrid yet, but I'm thinking about it. I think it's just being curious, being open and listening, and not being judgmental. Now, when it's important to have honest conversations. I'm not saying don't be honest, right? And especially this intergenerational dialogue. It was really important for my parents, who are baby boomers, to hear my kids and their concern about climate action. That was meaningful to my parents. They are doing more in climate action and thinking about their daily habits in their communities in the way that they haven't because of that dialogue. So I'm not saying don't be truthful, but just be curious and try not to be too judgmental, because people feel judged.
Yeah. Another question from the audience. It seems like superpower can be used in other subjects like wildlife conservation or other topics. Have you seen that the assessment could work in other contexts, not just climate action?
Yeah, I've actually had people in whole different areas outside of climate approach me and say, hey, could we use this assessment? Could we talk about it in a different way? And I just think it's a unique way of thinking about your personality. It's not like, leadership necessarily. It's service. It's how do you show up for the people you love? And I think it's something that everybody can relate to. So I love the idea of it applying to wildlife conservation, water conservation, climate action. In my brain, all of that is the same, but also dealing with the unhoused, dealing with healthcare, dealing with racial justice. I think there's some great opportunities.
Excellent. Okay. Last question, Heather. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for spending your time with us. Last question. We know that making climate actions visible to others in their community helps drive new social norms. Have you seen examples of places that are doing that well? This example has been working with 20 communities to help support such efforts, but they would love to learn from others. So give me an example of somebody doing it well at that community level.
Oh, well, this is great. So I have an example of a community who's doing it well, but it's tough because it's a very, very wealthy community, right? So it's Marin, right? I mean, you can barely find a plastic bag in that place, right? I went to a school where all the kids had stainless steel that they were served on, no styrofoam. So I've seen communities like that really come together. Outside of California, New York, Massachusetts, it's more challenging, but there's always pockets there, whether it's community gardening, whether it's composting. Here in Bozeman, we actually, for the first time, have community composting that's available, which is huge and really important because composting when there's 9 months of winter is very hard, trust me. So I've seen these little micro wins throughout that are really, really important. But a lot of times the great models I have come from the folks that you would, I guess, the usual suspects. So I would love to learn from you and the team at Rare of folks that you're seeing doing just really exciting stuff at the community level.
Sounds like we have our next conversation then already set up.
Exactly.
All right. The book, One Green Thing. Thank you so much, Heather White, for joining us on Rare Conversations. And to everyone that joined us today, you can expect to receive an email soon with a recording of the conversation, as well as a recap and a list of links to other resources. So Heather White, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for Rare Conversations, and we will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.